social responsibility doesn't come out of somebody saying you should be socially responsible. Because that kind of social responsibility comes with guilt, and it comes with anger, and it means doing something good for them, and at the same moment you're increasing the themness in the universe. And that is the peculiar predicament of activism, 1969.
Welcome to Here and Now with Ram Dass. I'm your host, Jackie Dobrinska, and each of you are part of this Ram Dass community, this growing community around the world. And this is episode 277. And today we're doing something a little different and hopefully exciting. Rather than giving you just one single lecture, we have chosen a theme, and then we've woven together clips throughout the decades of Ram Dass talking about that theme. So today we chose service and social action, and you'll hear several different clips. The first one starting in 1969, and then the last one after his stroke in Maui, where he sort of became who we all thought he was. You will hear how his views evolved and deepened over time, and how he really integrated both this inner awakening and outer engagement. So this episode, this theme, it invites us to ask some deep questions. What does it mean to serve? What does conscious activism really look like? And how do we show up for this sometimes crazy feeling world without losing ourselves to burnout or anger or despair? How do we keep showing up? It feels like this is the medicine we need these days. This is the guidance that so many of us are hungry for. How do we show up? And how do we keep moving forward? And Ram Dass's messages in these clips, they just echo timeless truths from so many different traditions. You can really hear the Bhagavad Gita coming through. If you don't know that story, the protagonist, Arjuna, who's a warrior, he throws down his bow. He's like, I don't want to fight. I don't want to do it. It's too much. And then Krishna, his advisor, sort of 12 steps him. He's like, you got to show up. You got to act. You got to do the footwork. But you also got to hand it over to something bigger. You got to trust in something bigger. Even the Christian tradition, the mystics often speak about being in the world, but not of it, engaged, but not entangled. And Ram Dass, he sort of lived at that intersection. He taught that social action isn't separate from the spiritual path. He said it is the path. And so whether you call it seva or karma yoga or simply doing the next right thing, the message is the same, and you'll hear it in these lectures. So before we dive in, it's always nice to get a little support for these times. And one of my favorite, and maybe yours at this point too, is Magic Mind. It's this zesty little green shot. It has nootropics and adaptogens, including lion's mane and ashwagandha, matcha green tea. I put it in 8 ounces of water each morning and drink it up. And when I do, I'm just a little happier, a little more positive, a little more focused. Life just feels a little bit more manageable. So highly, highly encourage you to check it out, whether you're looking for more energy without the jitters or more focus. Go to magicmind.com/Ramdas and use the code Ramdas. Also want to thank Reunion down in Costa Rica, which is this beautiful space where you can connect with yourself, with the world, with your deeper knowing, with community. They have great food. I think they're working on a Hanuman temple, and they give this audience $250 off any stay. So check it out, reunionexperience.org, and use the code BeHere250. So let's settle in and hear what Ram Dass has to say in this first lecture, which is in 1969. And it's a pivotal moment in Ram Dass's journey and also the collective culture. So it's the civil rights movement, it's the Vietnam War protests, it's the rise of ecology and psychedelics, and it's all swirled together. And in the midst of it, Ram Dass has just been out of Harvard for about 5 years, and he's just returned from India for the first time. And he begins asking, how do we engage with this world without falling into the illusion of us and them? And in this clip, he'll explore what it means to serve and what motivates us to do that. Now, if you're drowning in an ocean and someone comes to save you, you're not going to ask them, what's your motivation? Or say no if it's not clear. And yet, when we're on our own path, we have to ask ourselves these very subtle and deep questions. What is my motivation for doing this? And that's what Ram Dass is investigating here. So sit back, listen, and enjoy.
We play games because we've forgotten, because we are caught in the illusion. The illusion is based on the ignorance of separateness. It's based on the identification that an individual, a being, makes with his container. His container being that of him which was born into nature, meaning his body, his senses, his thoughts, his environment, his heredity. Okay. You and I are in the midst of a melodrama at this moment. Consciousness is that we can see and understand that we are in the midst of a melodrama at this moment. If you play Hamlet, when you go off the stage, you've finished playing Hamlet. Now, within the illusion is suffering. That suffering is our suffering. The Biafran mouth is our mouth. We don't put food in the Biafran mouth if we put food in the Biafran mouth because it's his mouth. Any more than your hand that picks up the spoon, puts food in his mouth. You know, I'll feed him today. See? True. See? Right. Same thing. I'll feed him today. I'll feed him today. Whose mouth? Which of our mouths are you going to feed now? See? I have a lot of wheat. Who has wheat? We have wheat. I will give you wheat if you appreciate that I have given you wheat. Forget it, baby. Who can afford it? That's like cooking with anger, you know. Now, would you say, well, then a starving person shouldn't accept the wheat? No. Take the wheat, but don't buy the model. Take the wheat and give the person who gives the wheat in return the total love that comes out of usness. Because when a person gives, they suck you into a contract of receiving. And for giving and receiving to occur, there have to be two of us. If there's only one of us, who's giving? Your left hand's giving your right hand? Here we are. The interesting thing is that we have come out of a culture where we were taught a set of an ethic, a set of rules of the game about how you're supposed to do it with other human beings. And we're so used to doing it because somebody told us to do it, or because we're guilty if we don't do it, or because we think we ought to do it. See? That it's hard to understand that a conscious being is at the same moment beyond law and thoroughly purely moral, in that he does many of the things that a person in the illusion does out of fear or guilt or cultural learning or habit, but he does them because they're the obvious thing to do. I mean, I can't lie to you, because if I lie to you, you've got to be them. I've got to be straight with you. I can't afford anything else, because if I create more thems, I'm just isolating myself, becoming an island unto myself more and more. I can't afford it. Social responsibility doesn't come out of somebody saying, you should be socially responsible. Because that kind of social responsibility comes with guilt, and it comes with anger, and it means doing something good for them, and at the same moment you're increasing the themness in the universe. And that is the peculiar predicament of activism, 1969. That we absorbed huge amounts of new energy because many, many, many millions of people came much more into the here and now. They came into the here and now through so many overdetermined factors, through changing of the cultural mores, through psychedelics, through television, through on and on and on and on, through crises in the world, through the going to the moon and seeing that the Earth is a village and so on. All of that stuff fed into us coming into the here and now, many of us. And that here and now-ness released huge amounts of energy. And we all began to dig about ecology suddenly. Because when we threw a piece of paper out of the window of our car, we were the one in the car behind it that was going to have to look at it. See? And when we belched the smoke out of our exhaust, we had to smell it. You couldn't keep going because it was all a circle and you kept coming back. And here we all are, and we're all stuck together. So now what? Ecology is a product of consciousness, that ecological awareness, not ecology, but the awareness of the predicament that finally we go, as Franz Kluckhohn's distinction, from being a culture that is man over nature. The mastery of the rational mind will control it all for our own gratification, to understanding that the Tao is true, that we are part of it, and that all we can do is figure out how to live in harmony with it. And in fact, the next level of opening, the next level of powers, the next level of it all comes from merging into larger and larger units, because when you identify with a larger boundary of self, then more energy is capable of passing through the system. And when you get to the point where, as Christ said, had ye but faith, ye could move mountains, you are expanded so much that you are the mountain, and when you get up and move, it moves. You don't sit around and push the mountain. Social responsibility doesn't come out of guilt, and it doesn't come out of a feeling that one has to be socially responsible. It comes out of that's the only thing you can do. You try to explain to us about reincarnation and karma, and how karma says it's all determined. And somebody says, well, if that's true, then I don't have to do anything. And I always say, well, that's right. In fact, Buddha says, as long as you think you're doing anything, you're stuck. The guy says, all right, I won't do anything. He's in his world of doing. He's going to do nothing. So you say, okay, which nothing are you going to do? Well, I'm just going to lie in bed, man. Well, that's a good nothing. We'll start with that. Okay. What are you doing? I'm doing nothing. All right, keep doing nothing. Now what are you doing? Well, I'm hungry. Oh, but I'm not going to do anything. Right. Well, I guess I'll go to the refrigerator and get some food. But I'm not really doing anything. You understand that? Gee, there's no food in the refrigerator. Well, man, I'll have to go and get some. Well, I'll have to get a job to get some bread, But I'm not doing anything. I want you to understand. I am not going to do a thing. Right? Okay, don't do anything. try staying in your body, see, and not doing anything. It's very far out. You're going to breathe. Come on, I thought you said you weren't going to do anything. I mean, is it your time to do nothing, or are you in a doing something trip in this body? And if you're in a doing something trip, then what do you do? Well, we got all this time and eternity to hang out. What do we do? Since there's nothing to do anyway, what are we going to do? And then you begin to understand that before Satori, you chop wood and carry water, and after Satori, you chop wood and you carry water. Ah, but what a difference. What a difference. Before Satori, the mountain is a mountain. In Satori, the mountain is not a mountain, and after Satori, the mountain is a mountain. When you have finished the whole round, and you are still in this body, you are in the world of no mind. See, you're not super thinking your life anymore. Your thinking apparatus is a response mechanism just like everything else. And you're just being here, and it's all happening. The funny thing is that as long as you think you're doing something, most of the time you're doing exactly the opposite of what you think you're doing. See, take if you protest against war. If you protest against war because you're angry at them for creating war, you create in another part of us the feeling that they are them. They in turn look at that which created that very cold draft on their neck, see, as them. And so you can watch hippies create police and police create hippies, and each one saying, we've got to have more to deal with them. They're getting stronger. If you notice, there better be more of us. Okay? Okay? Because as long as you act with attachment, and this is the secret of the game, as long as you act with attachment, you are acting from within the illusion, and within the illusion, the laws are unbreakable, and one of the laws is the law of action and reaction. Laws of action and reaction. So the simple rule of the game, the way I figured it out at this point, is you can protest, and for many people it is their karmic thing to protest. It is just as honorable to protest as to collect garbage, or as to be a president. It's no more and no less. It is your thing when you do it honestly and openly and in harmony with the universe. You can protest when you can love that which you protest, he who you protest against, he whom you protest against, equally as much as you love yourself. If you love that other person one smidgen less, forget it, man. Because you're creating just the opposite of what you thought you were doing.
So now it's 1983. The world is shifting. Reagan is in office. The Cold War simmers. And personal growth movements are taking root in mainstream America. Ram Dass, who is now in his 50s, has been teaching for over a decade since Be Here Now came out. And he's moved beyond the sort of psychedelic wave into more spiritual integration. And so in this clip, you can feel some of that maturity. And he's talking about how practice and social action are really the same thing. And it's interesting because teachers are still having this discussion. Do you meditate? Do you jump into the fray? And I think almost always it lands into some combination of the two, somewhere on that continuum. But the way we do that is so important. The Sufis say, you're not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop. And so when we act from that place, it has a very different feel. So let's hear what Ram Dass has to say.
Now, both of these paths that I have presented thus far, the networking in which we're separate but related, and the way in which we are one but appearing to be many and dancing as the many, both of them are genotypically different but phenotypically look a lot alike in the way they manifest, meaning on the surface. They both will show increased compassion. They will both lead to new trust in one's intuitive inner voices. Because in order, if you are part of a network, you understand that you have a function within the whole system, and you have to listen to hear what your function is in network. So you start to listen to hear how to manifest, how you are manifesting. And if you look at the yogic journey, you see that the first thing it does is go from the attachment, I was separate, I'm alone, into the one, into that place in us, our consciousness, that plane of consciousness in which we are not attached to body, personality, social stuff. And then it brings the circle around and brings us back into form. Because at that point, when you're out in la-la land, as I call it, you say, as long as I'm pushing away anything in the universe, I'm still pushing away part of the one. And I have to embrace the entire one. I have to embrace the darkness into my being. I have to embrace darkness and light in order to be free. So that these look, although somebody else is suffering, for somebody that is awakened to the point of relational networking, somebody else is suffering, they feel is connected to them, and therefore they must do something about it, because you and I are brothers and sisters. From the mystic point of view, the experience is you are me. And if your hand is in the fire, my hand is in the fire. And those are two different levels of generation of compassionate action. And I'd like to read a quote. One of them is from Jim Douglas, written a very good book on contemplation and resistance. And he says, to resist without seeking to shed the skin of the individual self. To resist without seeking to shed the skin of the individual self is not to resist at all. It is simply to confront the power of the world with a smaller antagonistic version of itself. Heavy. I just want us to open to this. I'm not, I want a dialogue. To resist without seeking to shed the skin of individual self is not to resist at all. It is simply to confront the power of the world with a smaller antagonistic version of itself. Now I'd like to read another quotation to you from a fellow named David Spengler. The response to nuclear war is coming from deeper places in people than it did in the 60s. For instance, I can protest nuclear war because I'm afraid of it, because I have personal fear of what I may lose, my life or support systems in my world. I may protest it because I have a larger altruistic sense of the well-being of the ecology. And so I say, hey, this is really stupid. We have no right to do this to our world. I may protest it because I have a sense of how it damages the economy and robs other needy social programs. There can be many motives, but there is some very deep level of myself that I can touch where I can simply say, I don't really need any of these motives. I just know it's wrong. Well, it's more than that. He says, I say, this shall not occur. It's a release of will. It's not a release of fear or violence. It's a release of will that, in its own way, is not in conflict with the nuclear proponents. If you are doing something and I say, stop doing that, I don't like it, then we can become polarized, and you may be strengthened in your resistance to me. So, in a sense, my protest only makes you, my adversary, stronger. But I can exert a will. I can just say no to something that is not really directed to you at all, but is just a statement of presence, statement of fact. It is not an issue of conflict. I feel that kind of no is beginning to really emerge from the collective consciousness of humanity. And it is that particular course of social action that is coming from a place in you in which you are no longer a separate entity only, but you are part of that out of which all law flows, and your action comes from a place in you in which, as Gandhi says, the soul force is indestructible and it goes on gaining power until it transforms everyone it touches. Gandhi said, make yourself into zero and your power will become invincible. What I see that Gandhi did was that he spoke out of two sides of his mouth, not in a negative sense, but in a positive sense. He said, for example, I could not be leading a true spiritual life unless I identify with all of humanity. You can hear that word identify from the networking point of view, meaning feel relationship with, or the identity, the formal sense of identity, meaning I am one with. I experience Gandhi as a mystic who, for perfectly political and practical reasons, created a social action form that did not be based on people having awakened spiritually, in the true sense of the mystic awakening. He said, I'm a practical man, I can't wait for India to recognize the practicality of the spiritual life in the political world. So he worked with what he had to work with. At the same time, he knew what the force of this game was. And, where was it? Nehru said of Gandhi, a man whose thought, word, and act were so closely co-related as to form an integrated whole. When meeting him, an electric shock went through the system, soothing and enlivening. I'm talking about what the game is potential here for, bringing those, that slash being an identity or an equality, social action, spiritual work. I was in Thailand, and I went to visit a monastery south of Bangkok in which they were curing opium addicts. Now, those of you that are in social service work, in mental health and medical work, know that curing heroin and opium addicts is not an easy job, and it's a very costly job in this country, and it's not a very rewarding one. That the addiction to these drugs is much more intense than the addiction to alcohol, and alcohol is helped by AA very markedly in things like that, where people who have been freed can help each other. It doesn't work quite that well with heroin addiction and opium addiction. Well, I heard from the woman who was the wife of the previous ambassador to Thailand that there was this monastery in which they took people in for 10 days at a cost of $15. And at the end of 10 days, they could not return again, and they were free of their addiction. And there was a recidivism rate of only 30%. That is, 70% of them were supposedly free of addiction. Well, I couldn't believe that. So I went there, as many senators had gone there from this country, as the CBS had gone there from this country, and everybody went away from there very perplexed and confused. They couldn't figure out what the game was. Let me tell you this story just for a moment, because it's relevant. Josie Stanton, this woman that took me down there, told me the story of this monk. This monk had been with the Thai DEA. He was a narc. And his aunt, who was a Buddhist saint, whatever that is, it's just a story, said to him, you know, if you don't watch out, you're going to just kill people. I thought, don't you want to help anybody? He says, I don't know how to do that. She says, you clean up your act and I'll tell you. So he left the government service and he became a Theravadan Buddhist monk. Now, the Theravadan Buddhist monks take 218 abstinences. I mean, you can't spit. I mean, it's absolutely no-no right across the board. You can't lie on a hard bed. You can't have any musical instruments. No perfumes, no eating after noon, it's got you in like this, okay? Not only did he do the 218, but he added 10 more. Like, he would not ride in a vehicle, so that when he had to go into Bangkok to do business for the monastery, which was some 200 miles away, he walked. This was merely his cleaning up his act. And then his aunt gave him an herbal brew, which was a diuretic, which people would drink, and they would vomit. And they would sit in a big circle, and they would take in, I went there, and there were 300, and you'd go, and there were the pallets in big rooms. The first dayers looked like junkies, and the second dayers looked like junkies, and the third dayers, and fourth, fifth, sixth. By the seventh day, they were saying, got a cigarette, and they were more relaxed, and by the ninth day, they looked just like us, and the 10th day, they were leaving. And I couldn't believe this. So I said to him, how do you do this? I said, I'm very impressed with this. I met him, he was like an oak tree, just like this. See? And he says, we tell them they can only stay 10 days and they can never come back again. This is it, in one try. And I heard they have saunas and they have diuretics, but we in the West have all that stuff too, and whatever the herbal diuretic, that might be a little mystical from the aunt, but there's something else. And I said, well, could anybody else do this that you do? Could it be translated to the United States or to the West? He says, perhaps. I said, well, could I do it? He looked at me very skeptically, and he said, well, possibly, but he wasn't the least bit convinced. And then he started a little test, which I will tell you about, because I didn't get very far. He said, imagine you were up in a mountain and it was cold and you had a blanket and you had decided you only needed that blanket and somebody came along and offered you another blanket. Would you accept it? So I've taken so many tests, in my life that I think of what the test is trying to say and oh no, I wouldn't accept it. I said, because righteousness usually wins, see? So I said, I have one blanket's enough, it's all I need. He says, well, they leave the blanket anyway under a tree, and after a while you need to go out to pee, and you leave your blanket and you go out and you walk around for a while, and it starts to snow, and you come back and your blanket's covered with snow and the other blanket's dry. Will you use it? So I said, of course I'd use it, because I only said I have a blanket. My blanket is covered with snow. There's our blanket. Sure, it's there. I'll use it. He says, no. See, that's where the quiz answer ended. I don't know what the next question was. All I realized was that I had met somebody who had become the cure for heroin addiction. He was not using a cure for heroin addiction. That the power of that man's being was so strong that he was the first thing I'd ever seen that was stronger than heroin addiction. And I was in the presence of that, and I realized that those of us that say, well, I'd like to take a job helping heroin addicts, meaning from 9 to 5, is very different from what the ball game was that he was talking about.
So this clip is just 2 years later. It's 1985. The AIDS epidemic is unfolding. The shadow of suffering is growing more visible in the collective. And Ram Dass is continuing to evolve. Now he's deeply involved in compassionate care and service. He's spending time in hospice settings and working closely with people on the edge of life and death. And in this clip, he unpacks the difference between Dharma, our sacred path, the unique gifts we are here to bring, and service, or seva, that arises when we give those gifts as a recognition of our interconnectedness, as we recognize the divine in all beings. So here, Ram Dass reminds us to get out of our black and white thinking because, as always, the truth is paradoxical. So let's listen as he talks about yoga in action.
Seva is a Sanskrit word which means service. And there is another Sanskrit word called dharma. And my friend KK now has taught me that the difference between dharma and seva is dharma is what you do because of who you are in life. I mean, it is my dharma to take care of my father. When I go beyond that to do something more than that, that's seva. Seva is the beyond, but you would only do the beyond if you understood something more than most people know. And that's why seva only comes with grace. This is very far out. It's the grace of appreciating the true way in which you are both a separate entity and you are not a separate entity. Because seva, doing service, demands that you absorb not only that paradox, the paradox that you are both one and you are the many, but a whole other set of paradoxes. Take, for example, the paradox about suffering. I mean, you go high enough and you look and suffering is perfect. It's part of the laws of things. I work with dying people and I watch how somebody with an ego the size of a cinder block, I mean thick, and they're full of anger and resistance and tightness, and then they suffer and they suffer and they suffer. And then I watch the light come into them and I watch their opening through this pain. And I think, oh my God, could that be? Could this beautiful saint have come out of that heavy ego? And I think I would never lay that suffering on that person, but by God, that suffering is sure awakening them. And from where I'm standing, I can see that suffering is the stuff that burns through to purity. You don't lay it on people, but when it's there, you acknowledge at one level of your being, which is up here in your third eye, that it is just as it should be. And at your heart level, which is the human part of you, the emotional part of you, suffering stinks. And that's a paradox. It's part of the stretching to be both divine and human. In divinity, suffering is part of the plan. In humanity, it hurts like hell, and you do what you can to alleviate it. And it's far out to work to alleviate suffering at the same moment knowing suffering's perfect. And you alleviate it for somebody who says, alleviate it for me. If somebody's hungry, they need food. And as Maharaji said to us, God comes to the poor, the hungry in the form of food. Once they have food, then they can concern themselves with these other issues. But you have to survive in the incarnation to do the work of the incarnation. And these are all parts of the process. So you work to end suffering at the same moment it's perfect. You are formless and yet you are in form. You are behind duality and yet you are in duality. These are all the paradoxes you are stretching to absorb into your each act. That's what the yoga of service allows you to do, or gives you the opportunity to work on. So you end up understanding that you serve in order to work on yourself, and you work on yourself in order to be a better instrument of service. And you can feel the circle work. You can just feel that circle work. So to complete my sequence, I go from trying to get high to trying to be human. I'm trying to get rid of trying along the way, to just getting to the point where there is divinity and humanity, and I'm doing what I'm doing, and I find myself with my father because that's in the way of things, and I find myself because I knew Larry in India, and now then I was on the board, and then when they said, who wants to be chairman this year, I found myself raising my hand, and I looked at my hand, I couldn't believe I had raised it. I mean, I who was dancing so light and hated institutions, suddenly playing with institutions. See, Just like the rabbi, who knew? Who knew? Who knew where you were going to end up today, right? But all I can tell you is it feels right. And what each of us must do, since for us to hear our Dharma and the route through to getting into the harmony of things where we are so appreciative of it all that then the seva comes out of us, each of us has a unique route through. It's built into the system, and you just have to listen, and you end up listening much more because you can't imitate anybody else's trip. It doesn't work. You can't even imitate your trip of last week. And sometimes you try a new one, and then you realize a few months later that wasn't it, and you've got to admit quickly you blew it. Get up, brush yourself off, look a little sheepish, and get on with it. Right? Each of us has a unique part to play. You can't get happy if you deny suffering in the universe. I'll tell you a simple law, because the juice you have to put into denying it cuts off the full flow. As long as you've got to turn something off, there's a cost. And the question is, can you look at suffering full in the face, open your heart to it, and still exist and be joyful? That's the art form. And that takes that embracing paradox. I've told this story before, but it happened so close I can't resist. I was on the beach over here on in Stinson Beach, at one of the nude beaches, several years back. You don't have to visualize this if you don't want to. I had been playing in the clay banks. We were all covered with clay. I had a frisbee. We were throwing the frisbee. I was about to throw the frisbee, running naked in the sunshine with clay and all that stuff. Water sparkling in the distance, all that, my MG up on the hill. I mean, I was perfect. I was, it was essence. And as I'm about to throw the frisbee, the thought goes through my mind, the memory of the inscription over Gandhi's tomb, which says, think of the poorest person you've ever known and ask whether your next act will be of any use. I mean, that could bring you down. Do you throw the frisbee or don't you? I threw the frisbee, and I continue to throw the frisbee, because I think my unique Dharma is the balance of all this. It's the joy, it's the appreciation of the incredible bounty of the world I've been handed, this kind of royal life I've got, at the same moment doing what I do to relieve suffering, without being drowned in the immensity of the suffering. As Gandhi said, what you do may seem insignificant, but it's very important that you do it. And that's true about political action. It's true about social action. It's true about all of it. It's true about all of it.
So by 1993, the world is waking up to globalization, identity politics, and climate urgency. And activists are burning out. Ram Dass, now in his 60s, has seen generations rise up with passion, only to be worn down by the attachments to outcomes. He's also watching his own spiritual community evolve beyond idealism. And so in this clip, he's warning of the exhaustion that comes from trying to fix the world. And again, turning to the Bhagavad Gita, he reminds us, you have the right to work, but not to the fruits of those actions. So he's speaking, how do we engage without clinging? How do we surrender our efforts and coexist?
I think it has to do, the question has to do, her question is in working in service areas. How do you relate to the outcome? Because you do have an outcome you want. You want them to not cut down the old forests. You want them to not do violence to the Mayan Indians. There are a lot of things you want. We certainly, when we go in seva to Guatemala, we want the people to have enough to eat and to survive and to thrive and to form community and so on. I think the question is how you hold to your objective. If I If I'm going to go to Detroit to get some chocolate chip cookies, my intent is to get chocolate chip cookies. Now, the question is, the ride to Detroit, what does that turn out to be? Is that ride to Detroit dominated by the anticipation of the chocolate chip cookies? Or am I just, I got to pay him back somehow for or am I, while I am going for chocolate chip cookies, am I fully in the process of driving to Detroit with what's there, the moment, from moment to moment to moment? Am I fully present? I've got these stories that have just I've had to struggle with. You may know this. There was a point where I was house sitting a farm in Massachusetts for a winter, and during that time I was writing the manuscript for How Can I Help, the book. And there came a point where I had run out of the ink thing for my computer, for my printer. And so I had to go into town, to Northampton. And so I started to drive to town, and I was in the middle of a thing, and I only have about 4 hours of writing a day, and so this was a real drag. I needed this thing, so I was rushing in, and I passed a guy who was thumbing who had crutches. See, and I thought, if I stop, it'll be such a production for him to get in, and then I'll have to take him wherever he wants to go, and I need the paper. I need the thing. So I went by. I mean, I was busy writing the book, How Can I Help? It gets worse. When I took the farm, there was a young fellow working in the basement, putting in a drywall, and he would come every day, and I would be writing. And one of the things is that I'm kind of addicted to people, and I end up, if I'm not careful, I end up all the time on the telephone or interviews or something, and I never take the time to quiet down enough to write. So I had committed myself to getting this book done as a deadline. I had to do it. So this fellow came by and he said, I'm really happy to meet you, and your books have helped me a lot, and I wonder if you'd have a little time to talk. And I said, look, I'd really like to. And usually I'd say yes, but I'm trying to write this book, and I just got to write the book, so I'm sorry. Maybe later on, but not now. And 2 days later, he stuck a gun in his mouth and shot his brains out. So, I can see how I can get so attached to the fruits of the action that I start to do violence to the process of life to get there. And there is a way in which you define a goal you're moving towards, and then you listen to hear what is the optimum act you can do. And since you can't control all the variables, I mean, we've done tremendous things in Guatemala and then having the whole thing ripped out by some machination we had no control over. And if we were attached to the fruits only, we'd be destroyed by that. We'd get very discouraged and very cynical. But the way I do it is I do what I do as impeccably as I can. Like, I'm doing this. This is a teaching process in which I am doing this for something to happen to all of us in the process. Whether it happens or not is not in my control. All I can do is do everything I can do towards the end of that happening. In other words, I can do the dharmic act, but what the effects are, I can't control. The dharmic act is directed by my anticipation of the effect. But I've got to not hold the effect so much in my mind that I miss the guy with the crutches, And I've got to also be ready to have something else happen than what I expected. And be ready, new moment, new situation, new moment, new situation. So I think that people feel that are activists that they have to be so committed, they've got to be very attached to the outcome. And I think that one can realize that the outcome as one quiets and tunes to the Gestalt, one can feel that one has a part to play in bringing about this outcome that would relieve suffering. And you listen and then you act in as harmonious a way and deep a way as you can. And from moment to moment, when we're doing action, we have to be very open to the new situation to make appropriate choices. You start a drive somewhere and something happens and there's a new moment. And you'll find that you keep pushing against it unless you are willing to assess the new moment fully. And how can you assess the new moment fully unless your mind is quiet and spacious? So there is a way to guide yourself by plans and yet keep emptying into the fullness of this moment and the fullness of this moment and the fullness of this moment, the fullness. Like, I am working on myself in order to prepare myself for the moment of my death. Because I can have at one level, there's a reincarnational model in me. At the same moment, I understand that the optimum way to prepare for the moment of the death is to live this moment fully. And it's interesting because some people get so task-oriented they lose the process. And I find in Guatemala that what we can often only offer is our beings, even though we think we're doing good. We've had the horror of the experience of trying to do good and end up having created more suffering. And I watch activists just destroy themselves by getting so identified with the results of their actions that even though they did it as impeccably as they could, they end up, God, you screwed up. I did my part. Why didn't you do yours? And that makes you, that's an arrogant disrespect for the mystery of the universe. Because you don't really know how it's supposed to come out. Really. I mean, I often would, if I could, spread my robes and take all the suffering into myself at some moments. Not often, but at some moments. But then I look and I talk to you and you and you and you, and I realize the way in which the suffering you have been through has been the stuff, the fire of the depth of your being and the depth of your compassion. And I wonder how presumptuous of me to take away somebody's suffering. And I begun to see there is a moral issue here, that I only have a right to help people get rid of the suffering they want to get rid of, not the suffering I want to get rid of for them. And it was very interesting because when we worked in Nepal, as we do with the blind, we met people who said, we don't want an eye operation. We're blind. That's the way it's supposed to be. We're blind. What are we No, it's good for you to get the sight back. They had a role in the society as a blind person. That was all working. And it was hard for us to temper our enthusiasm to do good. So it really requires, it seems to me, staying open from moment to moment when you're doing social action. And if you're too obsessed with the goal, you lose it. If you're too obsessed with the goal, since in much action you don't get what you want, you'll burn out much sooner. And so the injunction of the Bhagavad Gita, which says, be not identified with being the actor, be not attached to the fruits of the action. And yet the action happens. Right? Like, you ask the question, the response is happening. Where is my awareness in relation to this response? Am I the speaker? Am I thinking I'm telling her something? Or am I just sitting here and this whole process is happening? That's the actor part. Now I'm saying what I can say as impeccably as I can say it at this moment with my state of consciousness. What you're doing with it is what you're doing with it. I can't be attached to what you do with it.
And finally, we arrive in 2018. The world may feel like it's an upheaval in a way it hasn't in the past, or maybe very similar to the past. Now it's polarization, it's climate anxiety, it's mass shootings, digital overwhelm. And Ram Dass is now in his late 80s. He's living in Maui. It's years after the stroke. It's actually just a year or so before he passes. So his speech is slow. His body's changed. But his presence is still very luminous. So this clip, because of the speech cadence, it's almost like a meditation. We have to slow down. We have to be patient. We have to wait for the words. He often needed to search for words and didn't have quite the range as he did before. But they're drops of wisdom. He carries the weight of a lifetime of service. And he asks us in this to do a pretty big practice. You know, Krishna Das talks about Ram Dass almost as if like he's has elements of a saint. He's been cultivating this practice of love everyone and tell the truth for almost 50 years at this point. And it's not something that happens overnight. And it sort of reminds me of that story right after the Last Supper. So it's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus is praying, knowing that his arrest is near, and Judas arrives with the cops, basically, and he identifies Jesus with a kiss. And then Jesus is seized, and Peter draws his sword, and he cuts the ear of, like, the top cop. And Jesus stops the violence, and he heals the man. And then the man continues to arrest him, and the rest of the story unfolds. But there's that moment of compassion where he heals his enemy. And I wonder, like, can we all do that? And what would have happened if he hadn't? Like, that's an interesting question, right? So Jesus's dharma, it was compassion. It was Ram Dass's too. And what's ours? So let's listen to this last clip.
Ram Dass, what about the importance of, and how do you create that balance of working on yourself at the same time you are taking actions in the world that you would hope would benefit humanity? How do you even approach that in terms of balance?
Well, the key is karma yoga. Karma yoga, you take what is in front of you as a step towards God. If you have somebody you love, you take that as a step of sadhana. If it's somebody you hate, the hatred is in your mind. You love the hatred. You work on it. You work on your mind to have all thoughts are positive towards God. And social action is motivated by various motives in you, but those are attachments. And you take social action not exactly to doing something to somebody, but it's you and the person you are fighting are one. And you see the person whom you're fighting as a soul manifesting their karma. And you should relate to them as a soul. And not to their karma.
That's pretty difficult to do when there's all this, so much polarization, anger, hatred, fear manifested by this karma. How do you even begin to approach embracing that with love?
Well, I have a picture of President Trump on my altar. And my attention is placed on that picture. And I say to him, I haven't known you as a soul. Your karma is affecting my karma. But now I'm talking to the soul. You have a heavy burden of karma. I feel for you. And if I meet you as soul to soul, I feel compassion for you. And we will, soul to soul, examine where your karma came from. And we can rid you of that karma.
Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of this new experiment. As always, we give thanks for the privilege we have to be here with you, and we dedicate the good that comes from this to all beings everywhere. Namaste and blessings.
This podcast is brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. We appreciate you listening, and we appreciate all the support that you've given us. Please continue that support and donate at ramdas.org. We can then continue to share what Ram Dass has been sharing for all of these years. Thank you.